What's going on, everybody? It is the one and only Q here from Retro Q Gaming, and yes, you know what that means. But anyway, beside the point, we've got a bit of a different video to make here today. This is a long-awaited video, one that's been, well, frankly, 23 years in the making, or at least just under 23 years in the making, because there is a fateful date of October 27th, 1999, which was the start of this video, planted the seeds of this video, and it's taken such a long time to finally grow and come to fruition, and here we are. Well, what are we talking about? Well, as you can see before you, this is Final Fantasy VIII, or rather, in particular, this exact version is Final Fantasy VIII Remastered, but that doesn't really factor into the equation here because the base game is the same, and that is the key important thing. Now, of course, why are we talking about this? Well, first off, let me give you the brief TLDR of what Final Fantasy VIII is, if for some reason you're living under a rock, but it kind of factors in as well. Final Fantasy VIII, of course, is do we call it a sequel? It was the much anticipated follow-up after the masterpiece, groundbreaking, whatever you want to call it, Final Fantasy VII on PS1 and PC. Of course, the less said about the drop-off, if you will, between Final Fantasy VII and VIII, the better. But anyway, I played Final Fantasy VIII way back in the day, right at launch, and, well, frankly, I was expecting the world after Final Fantasy VII. But like many people, we were met with disappointment. We were met with, well, the Final Fantasy VIII level disappointment, if you will. But needless to say, Final Fantasy VIII was not a great game. In fact, to many people, it's not even a good game. And to some people, including myself, it's a bad game. In fact, it's one of the 3 mainline numbered entries in Final Fantasy series that I would consider a bad game. The other one being Final Fantasy III, that is proper Final Fantasy III, not what you Americans out there call Final Fantasy III, and the other being Final Fantasy XV. In no particular order of those 3 games, by the way, but still the point remains. Anyway, why are we talking about this, and what's the difference between it, and why is it being here, and what's the logic behind all of this? Well, back in the day, I got all the way up to disc 4 on Final Fantasy VIII on the PS1. Now, I never finished it. I never finished it back then, but I got all the way up. I still even remember the exact place I was, and the exact place that I got to, and the exact boss I was having issues with. I got up to Ultimacia's castle, which I'm sure, as anybody knows, is, I mean, hell, it's not even a spoiler. The game is almost 23 years old. In fact, it will be 23 years old in just over a month. But I got up to the final castle, the final dungeon, the final whatever you want to call it. Now, unfortunately, with Final Fantasy VIII, because it was brand new at the time, when you get to disc 4, it locks off specific areas of the game. You can't go back and do side quests. You can't go back and get access to what's in there, cards, a triple triad, or whatever it is. But you get the idea. There was no internet to help us out with all of that stuff back then. So, I locked a bit of the content off from myself from back in the day. But also, when I went forward and I went to attempt to complete the game, because of how the last dungeon works and the fact that they take your abilities away and all of that as well, you have to get them back piece by piece, one by one, which you get to select when you do it, as you fight the bosses in the final castle and make your way through there. Now, my problem was I basically soft-locked myself on a specific boss, because I couldn't go forward, because I couldn't beat the boss. He would kill me in like one turn as soon as he did a move. And because of what I had picked, I couldn't go any further. I couldn't combat his options and combat what he had chosen and what he does and his actions. But because of where I had saved it at the time, I couldn't go back. So I'd softlocked myself. I came up against an insurmountable boss that was literally impossible for me to defeat, because I would go in with, 6, 7, 800 health, or maybe 1,000 or 2,000, or not even 2,000, 1,200 if I was lucky. No way to counteract his abilities and moves and stuff like that. And he would open with a move that would kill everybody for like 3,000 or 4,000 damage instantly, and I couldn't mitigate it. So I was pretty much screwed. Now, fast forward all these years later, In my mind, that was where I gave up on the game, which in fact, it was where I gave up on the game. And I never, well, I can't say I never went back to it, but I never went back to that save file. So the way I had remembered it, let's jump forward 22 years to earlier this year, just a few months ago in 2022. In my mind, that was the furthest I'd ever gotten. And I have to even to just explain this hurts me so much. But there's a mechanic in Final Fantasy VIII where you jump through time, yes, you read that correctly, and control other different characters at set points of the game. And this is one of the most egregious and most awful things in the game that just completely kills it. I mean, completely kills it completely, I guess. And it just makes it so unenjoyable in so many different ways. It's one of the many things, that the draw system, the junction system, how broken it is, the level up system, the experience, the fact that everything just scrolls and scales with you. It's just to save but a few. And of course then the story. That's just awful within itself. But before I lose my train of thought completely with just shitting on that game so much as it rightfully deserves, in my mind I had never got up to that point again. And in my mind, that I could remember, every time I had ever attempted to sit down and properly play Final Fantasy VIII and give it another legitimate shot, the only point I ever remember getting up to, multiple times in fact, was at the end of Disc 1 / start of Disc 2. There's a whole desert prison, desert base escape, missile base kind of dealio, and it's an awful segment, and then it's followed straight away at the start of Disc 2 by another awful time travel segment. And multiple times I attempted to play the game and I got up to that point and I just said, no, this game is so bad. This story is so bad. The mechanics are so bad. The whole gameplay / time travel / different characters thing is just so bad. I can't do this. And I gave up multiple times. I've tried probably at least 10, if not a dozen separate times to play this game, and I could not do it. I gave up completely. Gave up completely. Now, that was how it was in my mind. There was a slight difference in there because I booted up when I was playing Final Fantasy VIII Remastered earlier this year in 2022. Just as a quick comparison, I knew I still had my old original save file on my PS1 memory card. Or so I thought. I knew I definitely had a save file on there, but I thought it was my one that we explained earlier in this video. So I booted it up anyway. Final Fantasy VIII on PS1 is a 4-disc game, so I popped in disc 4 because as far as I knew, for all intents and purposes, I was in the final castle and final dungeon. So what did I do? Popped in disc 4, hit load, and got a very strange splash screen right on me. Please insert disc 3. And I'm like, what the hell? So I put in disc 3. I boot up the game at where I am. Fun fact, it's actually like, it was within a few minutes of where I was at the time when playing Final Fantasy VIII Remastered. Human show, as we all know. But I'm just thinking, holy shit. At some point, I actually started over on the PS1, probably back in the day, and got all the way up to part of disc 3. And like I made significant progress in it. And I had no recollection of doing that ever. But, I gave up on that point. There was no point in me continuing on that version. I was playing the remastered one and we go from there. But yeah. Anyway, jump forward. Can cut out a lot of the extra stuff here as well. But mid-2022, I finally officially completed Final Fantasy VIII for the first time. And, I can't give the game credit in any way, shape, or form. I wanted to sit down and give it one last hurrah, one last true attempt to do it. And honestly, I streamed that game. I streamed every part and every time I was playing that game. And honestly, I wouldn't have been able to do it. The game itself is still, to this day, so bad. It's still so bad in practically every way that I would not have been able to do it if it wasn't for Stream Chat. I would, if you had sat me down and just, if I had sat down to attempted to play this game offline and give it the one last true attempt, I would not have been able to do it. I would have quit. There was multiple different times during the playthrough that I would have quit. In fact, just streaming it just in general wasn't what made me do it and wasn't what pushed me to get through it. If I had sat there and if I was streaming to zero audience and if I was just streaming it just for the sake of it, and like I said, zero audience the entire way, I would have given up and quit multiple different times. But it's the people. Stream chat is what facilitated me to do this. If it was not for Stream Chat, I would not have made this. Now, I'm not saying they didn't help me, they didn't tell me where to go or backseat gaming or anything like that. It's the back and forth, the banter, the observations, their commentary on what I was doing, and the reaction between everything. And because of me, my history with JRPGs, Final Fantasy, whatever it is, and particularly Final Fantasy VIII, I can't even say both the positive and the negative, but we'll just go with just Final Fantasy VIII. If it wasn't for them, I wouldn't have done it. And I had always considered it a damage to my, I won't say ego, but a damage to my JRPG credibility and point of pride, that even though as much as I hated that game, I had never finished Final Fantasy VIII. I'd finished Final Fantasy I, I finished Final Fantasy II, I finished Final Fantasy IV and V and VI. I finished Final Fantasy VII, 9, 10. You can't really finish 11. But, I mean, I guess I've done all the main stories on all the expansion packs and all in there. I finished Final Fantasy 12. I finished Final Fantasy 13. I don't even count it, but I finished Final Fantasy 13 too. I couldn't finish Final Fantasy 13 3. That game is also so bad. But I only count the original first entries, so I don't count Final Fantasy 10 2, 13 2, 13 3. You can't really finish Final Fantasy 14, but I'm completely up to date with it. And I've even finished Final Fantasy 15. And yes, I'm most likely, hopefully at least, going to finish Final Fantasy 16 because that's going to be coming out on PC. So naturally, I can play it better than the PS5 ever can. So, you see my point. The fact that there was the one or two games, I've never finished original Final Fantasy 3 because like I said, it's just so bad, I just could not do it. But to now mark Final Fantasy VIII as bad as it is off that list, and as much as I hate that game off that list, that's now a good point of pride for me. I'm happy to say that it's done. And yeah, all I can say is it still remains awful. It still remains bad. The story is god awful. The characters are terrible. The gameplay mechanics, both in storytelling mechanics and just gameplay as well. The junction system, the draw system, the GF system. It's awful in so many ways. There's almost no redeeming quality about the game whatsoever. But it's still a mainline Final Fantasy. It's still the one that, I was going to say preceded, that succeeded. Or, yeah, that's right after. Yes, it would have been the one that succeeded after Final Fantasy VII. And well, the comparisons were inevitable. And that's what made them look even worse. But still, despite all of that, Stream Chat, I'm not going to name specific names just because it wouldn't be fair. But you know what? Stream Chat, I couldn't have done it without you. And for that, I am truly, truly thankful. And that highlights just how great streaming, the stream community, the stream chat, the regulars, the not so regulars, the irregulars, the once in the blue moons, even the single viewers, the lurkers. It's just how important it all can be. And for that, well, we got a super thank you out there. Couldn't have done it without you, lads. And ladies.